Yo, welcome everybody to another edition of the Texas Football Channel on orangebloods.com. We don't have a show named necessarily for what we're doing right now, but it is the Orange Bloods YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson as always. And we're here to talk about the NFL draft, which is literally right around the corner. It is the eve of the NFL draft. For me, it feels like it's kind of snuck up on me. I haven't completely done the draft deep dive like I normally do, which is weird because the Cowboys have a 10th pick and you would think I'd be a little bit more all in, but maybe not. But Anwar and I are here to talk about the Longhorns in the draft and what their situations look like and whether or not some of them made the right decisions. Each guy's got a little bit of a different story. If you like the video, make sure you hit the like button. That stuff helps. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit that button before we just stop, pause the button, hit subscribe. That is really important to us. And know that you can join us for this ride of daily videos of Orange Bloods and UT football content. As a matter of fact, Anwar had something on the tight ends yesterday. If you missed that, go check it out. Monday, we had a spring kind of Monday overreaction show that we did live Monday night. There's a lot of stuff on the channel that you've missed. You can sit back, soak in some UT football content. But Anwar, it is not draft day discussion. It's draft eve discussion. None of these guys have any buzz behind them. I did not expect that.
I mean, the guy that probably has just a little bit would be Joseph Ossai. He'd be the only guy that you're standing on the table and saying, wow, that guy could be something special potentially. You know, the Cosmi thing and, the draft process is so interesting, Catch, because all you do is hear the negatives, right? That's just the draft process. So you've heard a little bit more about Sam Cosmi and maybe footwork or blocking and this and that, but he ran a really good time at his pro day. Now it's unofficial, wasn't at the combine. So, it all depends on when someone stops the clock. But, I saw something on the NFL Network the other day that said it was a weird stat, but it was like of all the people who were 6'7" or above, Cosmi would have ran the fastest time of anyone I don't know how many people are 6'7".
That feels like a stat I would have come up with.
Yes, it is.
If you look at all of the prospects that Texas has signed in the last 20 years who were 6'7" or taller.
So, and then you would have broken down and which one were 5 stars and 4 stars and 3 stars. And it would have been like 10 thoughts from the weekend, just on that number. And then of course, we'll get to the Sam Ehlingher discussion, and I don't know if you want to start with that, but there's so many guys that are eligible. It's Ehlinger, Cosmi, Ossai, Taquan Graham, Caden Sterns, Chris Brown, Tariq Black, your guy Brennan Eagles. We had our battle. It's so funny, and people might be new to the channel. The one thing you can always expect that happens organically between Tex and I is that we always end up on a hill that we're both willing to die for, before the season. So this past year, it was Brennan Eagles, that was Ketch's guy, versus Caden Sterns, who was that was my guy. I think the year before it was Zach Shackelford, and was he a good player or not player? We've had many. We've had many. Oh, was it Andrew Beck? I think was a year before that.
You're right. These have become annual deals between us.
Yes, Andrew Beck. And right now it's Casey versus Hudson. It's not we're not killing the table as bad, but the Andrew Beck, Zach Shackelford, Caden Sterns versus Brennan, those were some pretty epic battles.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think people are hyping up the Casey Thompson Hudson Card deal. Obviously, right? It's a big one. And I feel like it's the one that you and I are least emphatic about. We come out of the spring game and we're like, and people are like, Ketch, you are so hardcore Hudson Card. You never say anything nice about Casey Thompson. And I was like, well, no, because I like Casey. If Hudson Card weren't around, I'd be buying up all my Casey Thompson stock. The people would be, it's that they have really two different and uniquely talented quarterback talents. But you're right. There's nothing else yet that I've seen on the landscape this year, rightly or wrongly. It is going to be that. But last year it was definitely Caden Sterns and Brennan Eagles. It was such a bad hill for both of us to die.
Both of us. Both of us not on ever.
In retrospect, I feel like the Andrew Beck and Zach Shack, at least this year, they're hills worth dying on. It's the starting quarterback job. Like, it says a lot about the program that we've been covering and how short this program has been coming up, that like the big disagreements that you and I have had issues with, two players that went undrafted, although to Andrew Beck's credit, like he has emerged as an NFL player that is indisputable. He's played in games. Yes. Like I feel like you came back and won the Andrew Beck discussion because I love if a guy proves it and makes it to the NFL. Like, to me, I will wave a white flag in doubting the guy. My whole thing about Zach Shackelford was he was not going to make an NFL team. And I was just like, he's a good college player, but he's not so good that he's an NFL player. I don't know that bet, like he won like all conference honors, like on some level. It was like whatever it is that I saw with my eyes wasn't backed up with it's funny because I think this weekend I used the all conference recognition to help potentially decide a bet. And you're like, hey, you weren't going with that with Zach Shackelford. Touche. Yes. But like, it's, you and I are going to talk about Caden Sterns and Brennan Eagles. And in the end, neither one of those players was really good enough for us to be dying on hills over.
Yeah.
At some point, if this program's ever going to really be great, you and I have got to find some hills involving players that are really, really good. And maybe that happens this year. But God, we're getting ready to have a Caden Sterns, Brennan Eagles conversation. I feel like Caden Sterns will be drafted. He'll be a day 3 pick.
Sure.
I feel like Brennan Eagles, I don't think he gets drafted.
I don't think
he tested well enough to make me overlook how I don't know. Like maybe somebody will be like, they'll love big receivers like Tom Herman loves big receivers. And they'll maybe Tampa Bay, they love big dudes. Like maybe they would take like a late flyer on him, but
his agent is Ezekiel Elliott's agent as well.
Not for long.
I'm just pointing out, so he may have an agent that, can call a GM, and he might have been working the phones, and, he might have somebody that, takes a late round flyer on him. You never know.
There's a chance he can go in day 3. Absolutely.
Sure.
There's also a chance. I think Caden Sterns gets drafted on day 3. So like, I don't think there's a chance that he goes undrafted. I think in this conversation that you and I have about those two guys, we are really arguing about like who the better shortest basketball player of all time was. Was it Muggsy Bogues or Spud Webb? You know what I mean? Like we could have that conversation, but like on some level, we're not talking about an all-time great. And it kind of feels the same way. I have 3 big questions related to the draft. It doesn't have to do with any of those guys. And one of them involves Ehlinger, one of them involves Ossai, and one of them is kind of a bigger picture conversation. I'm going to let you pick which one we tackle first.
I want to go Sam. I love quarterback conversations.
Is Sam Ehlingher going to be drafted before the 7th round?
Oh, see, you took that. That's like, what that was like? That's like asking someone to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, but you can't say 7. Because right? Because you took away the one thing that I would have probably said would be like 7th round. And so now you're asking me, does someone use like a potential 6th round pick on Sam Ehlingher? I will hesitate, and I won't put a lot of money on it. I'll say yes. I'll say he potentially goes in the 6th round. Because at that point, you might have someone that feels like, look, he's a 4-year starter at the University of Texas. He does have a lot of stats. He's one of the passing leaders, and we can pull up all the stats, but, he's one of the passing leaders. I mean, he's got game time. He's got experience. He's got the ability to, be not only the quarterback, but an H-back potentially. I mean, so there's a lot of different things that you feel like he can do. He's also a good student in the game. I've read certain things, Ketch, that said he wowed in interviews as far as just his knowledge of football, which you and I would totally expect, right? Yeah. I mean, we know this kid is a student in the game. We know what school he went to, high school he went to. Like you can't come out of a Taj Dodge program and not know about being a quarterback. So
right.
So we know that. So I will say there's a potential, and that's by the 6th round. There's a team out there that says, you know what, we need another quarterback just to throw in there. We don't want to wait around to the 7th and see if he's there or see if he's undrafted. So someone takes a flyer on him in the 6th round, supplemental pick, something to that effect. That I'll go 6. I won't go higher than that. What about you?
I agree with you. I think he goes in the 6th round to the New Orleans Saints. That's my prediction.
Okay.
He feels very much like a Sean Payton guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Sean Payton is a Taysom Hill guy, but he also was a Chase Daniel guy. That is who I think Sam most kind of to me, Sam is very Chase Daniel. And, Chase Daniel was another guy that almost the same profile. And Chase Daniel went to South Lake Carroll. So he was a Todd Dodge guy. You know what I mean? Like there's some real connections and kind of similarities there. That's what I've been thinking from the very beginning. 6th round to the Saints. And I think he could make the practice squad or make team. Like, every NFL team's a little different, but I agree with you. I think it could be the 7th round. I think someone takes him in the 6th for all of the reasons that you outlined, that someone will fall in love with the intangibles part of that. And I think that will mean a lot for a team that's like, we got to take somebody. We're going to take a quarterback in the 6th or 7th round. All these guys are flawed. Give me the guy that's not flawed makeup wise. And I think Sam falls into that category. Let me ask you a sub Sam question.
I mean, if Sam's drafted, he's the first quarterback UT's had drafted since Colt McCoy.
Vince Young. Or Colt McCoy. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So since the 2010 draft, so first in 11 years. I completely forgot about Colt for a second, partly because it felt like it was forever that he got drafted. There are a lot of Colt McCoy might get drafted in round 1 discussions leading up to that draft, and he went in round 3.
Okay.
If you had told Sam in January that he was going to go in the 6th round, pick 222, does he come back for another year?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think you and I probably got the same impression that as much as everyone thinks Sam was Mr. UT, Sam was over being in college.
This year sucked.
Yeah, it's just been it's been a lot of disappointments, and not to say a lot of disappointments, but this year wasn't great. He ends up being a guy that's known for having a 1-4 record versus OU. The Sugar Bowl thing will be something that everyone always remembers. And so how many times he has to hear they're back, get questions about it, so on and so forth. And now you start talking about, potentially there's the idea of like, oh, well, Sark is here. But Sam knew. Sark was hired before Sam decided what he was going to do. I think Sam was just over the college thing. I think Sam did his time. He did 4 years at UT. He lived his dream, but his dream was to play in the NFL. And I think he's just at this point, he just wants to move on with his future. So I think he would take 6th round and working his way up in the ranks that way.
Fair enough.
That's my guy.
As you view this, and look, I have numbers in my head. So I have an answer to this question, but I'm saying, like, I've already admitted at the outset of this that I have not been knee deep in the draft discussion. So this is a very ballpark question based on how we view Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a percentage breakdown, if you can, of 6th round, 7th round, or goes undrafted.
Ooh. You're going to give me the percentage thing with you.
Do you want me to give you mine first and tell me if it sounds about right?
Okay. All right. I'm going to write this down because
you won't have to. It's very simple.
Okay.
I got 40% sixth, 40% seventh, 20% undrafted. You know why I'm leaving the 20% undrafted?
Yeah.
Confirmation bias. Because we do this every year. We're going to talk about some of these other kids aren't going to get drafted, right? Like you and I fight over Brennan Eagles and Zach. We fight over guys that don't get drafted all the time. We cover these guys so closely that we assume they're going to go definitely somewhere in the 6th or 7th round. They have to, but maybe not. Maybe not. So I don't know. Does that sound? That
sounds good. That sounds good. I mean,
that means he gets drafted 4 out of 5 times.
4 out of I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, 20% undrafted might be a little high, but it's hard to negate a 4-year starter at the University of Texas. It's really hard to do that.
That's why I think there's an 80% chance he gets drafted.
Yes.
But boy, if I don't know if he didn't pass, let me put it to you like this. If his intangibles are a 10, and I think they kind of are, like, I think coaches look at him and think, I would have that guy in my locker room for a year. No question. But if they were at like a 7, yeah, like Sam occasionally partied on 6th Street at a level while he was in college that he had earned a little bit of a partier. Like, you take his intangibles down a notch or two. Because we think he goes in the 6th because of the intangibles. But it feels like guys that with intangibles go undrafted, and guys with talent. It's funny. If you pay attention to the way the draft goes, there'll be like 7 or 8 5-stars that go on round 1. Then there'll be like 10 guys that go in round 2. Then there'll be a couple in round 3. And then there won't be any in the 4th and any in the 5th. And then you get to like the last 40 picks, and teams start taking guys that sucked in college, but had big 5-star. They take a guy like Ben Davis, and it's like, oh yeah, he was the number 5 player in the country once upon a time. And, the guy goes to training camp and more times than not doesn't make the roster, but you'll see like 5 or 6 5-stars go in the last 2 rounds, and they barely even played because there's this perception of talent.
Sure.
And there's that, I don't know. Like I said, I think Sam gets drafted. I've prepared myself mentally that he might not.
That's the scary part. I mean, that's the, there's certain things. I remember when I was in Detroit and I was covering the Lions, a guy that some people thought would get drafted was Kellen Moore. And you go back to his stats and what he put up there, fantastic stats in college, but wasn't drafted. Now there's, you can say, oh, well, Sam Ehlingher is taller than Kellen Moore and all that type of stuff. And that's true, but there's also knocks on Sam and his arm,
they're both guys. Yeah. That's a good profile. That's a good one, actually.
And Kellen Moore was undrafted, and he was undrafted and drafted by the lot. And I mean, to be honest with you, from what people say about Sam being a potential, coach at some point because of his knowledge, honestly, as I talk it out and I kind of stumble upon a good potential analysis of him, he reminds me of Kellen Moore in that regard, because he's a guy that's probably going to be late to undrafted, probably hits the team, maybe stays on for a couple of years, but we're not expecting him to be in the league for 10 years, but it probably switches into coaching at some point. And then you end up seeing Sam Ehlingher as an offensive coordinator, 10 years from now. Like that's what I think he is.
Chef's kiss. That's really good.
Thank you.
Really good. We could even move. I'll let that even, we don't need to say anything else about Sam. Joseph Ossai. I think I know your answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. I think Joseph Ossai goes somewhere in the 2nd round. I have heard 0 first-round buzz for Joseph Ossai. He seemed like a guy that's going to be somewhere. It wouldn't be a shock if he's one of the first 15 picks of the 3rd round. It feels like he's somewhere between 45 and 75 as a draft prospect. If you told Joseph Ossai the day that he makes his decision, you're going to go between 45 and 75, Does he come back for another year?
That's a fantastic question. You might consider it. But the hard part when you ask that question, because it's a really good question, the hard part is 2020 was such a disappointment for these guys. I mean, so it's interesting because they had the option knowing that, there was a new coach here, but 2020 was so disappointing, and for various reasons, just not being able to, first of all, deal with COVID and that issue, and then not being able to practice and so on and so forth, stuff postponed, put off, games canceled, all those type of things. I feel like some of these guys were just over it. And it's just like, the Joseph Ossai, at this point, he's like, yo, this is like foul money. I mean, we weren't talking about Joseph Ossai like this before the season at all. And so at that point, it's almost like the Malik Jefferson thing, where Malik Jefferson had a one really good season his junior year. And he's like, I'm out. I'm not risking this anymore. I'm out of here. And so I'm gonna go. No, I'll say no. I'm gonna say this is a guy that realized, probably at the time he was coming out, thinking he could probably be a first rounder. I always say, Catch, if someone projects you within a certain round, or you got to add at least a 2-round cushion to that one. If they say first, be prepared to be second or third. If they're saying third, you might be fifth. I mean, because I Catch, any person I've ever gotten to know as a college prospect, and that's going to go into the NFL, people I've interviewed that were going to go into the NFL, I always tell them, don't have a draft party. It will be the worst decision you've ever made, because you're going to sit there thinking, oh man, I'm getting drafted like first round, early second. And next thing you know, that food got cold. It's the third round. You always hear stories about guys leaving the party and they're all upset and trying to do different things. And next thing you know, it's fourth round. Like, I don't know if I would even tell guys, unless you're the top 10 pick, I won't even go to New York. I mean, I know they're not in New York now, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And can I give a quick story and I'll go back to Ossai?
Yeah.
So in high school, I covered Travis Henry, who was a running back at Tennessee, eventually went to Baltimore, who eventually got arrested for pushing dope at some point and had to serve some prison time after playing. And Travis got into a lot of different trouble.
He's also known for having like 75 kids.
75 kids? Yeah, Travis. By the Travis, I covered, you ever have a guy, I don't know, maybe he was like my Drew Brees, where you covered just about every single one of his games. Yep. And I remember Travis, when he was a sophomore, he was a nose tackle, got converted, and then he just blew up, right? So I covered him all throughout high school. I was at every single game. Saw him rush for 4,000 yards his senior season. And then he went to Tennessee. Jamal Charles had so Travis had this big party back in Frostproof, Florida, because everybody was like, Travis is going to go first round. And so when it first started, Travis saw me, hugged me. Like, it's all great. Like, it was all cool. And as that draft kept going on and on and on, and his name wasn't called, he left the party. No one's talking anymore. It just got bad. And I think eventually—
When did he get drafted?
I want to say he was either late, like the very end of the first round to the Buffalo Bills, or the very beginning of the second. I got to go.
I'm looking it up right now.
Look it up, because what happened was, I remember Travis got drafted like during a commercial break.
Well, he went at the end of the second round.
Yeah. So it was bad. Okay. It was the end of the second round. It was bad. It was bad, but he thought first. So anybody who's a prospect, so now back to the Joseph Ossai, if they're saying second round, man, it may be third. You could wake up the next morning and be really pissed off and be one of those guys who still Mel Kiper's top prospects on the board, on day 3. Like, that happens every year.
Oh, that's the worst. But the thing is, I'll say about Ossai, and this is why we've had this conversation about Malik Jefferson, and we've all, you've done that thing where you've looked up his contract a few times, and it's like, I think, he had a couple million guaranteed as like a third round pick. If he goes exactly where Travis Henry went, right? So pick 58. Mm-hmm. He's banking like, I don't know what the numbers are, but he's taking home like $5-6 million.
Yeah.
And I think if you tell him after the season, you know what I mean? I think when you say it like, if you forget about the pick number and you just say, you're definitely going to have a few million in the bank. I think those kids leave at that point every time. And, you know, you and I are I'm so glad that you and I work together because there are two kinds of people in the world. There are the kind of people that begrudge these kids for going out and making that cash, and there are those that don't. And you and I fall into the category of, if a kid wants to play this game, this violent game that takes, if some kid just decides, I got to be paid to do this, or I want to be paid, or I need to take care of my family, or I don't want to be poor, I want to pay, whatever.
Yes.
You and I are like, go get it, kid. Go Correct. Get as much of it as you can. And like, I am not going to judge you for that. You and I fall into that category. It warms my heart because there are a lot of people that do, right? There are a lot of people that judge them for not living up to what it is that they thought they should have done, right? Like, right. Oh, you should have come back and, you know, and he might say, well, look, I got $6 million for going in the second round. And if I come back, maybe I make the first round and make $3 million more, but I'm okay with my 6. And I want to get started.
Pick 55 gets a 1.7 million signing bonus, and his contract is worth 5.7 over 4 years. So at the end of the day, this person is a millionaire in the middle of the second round. Yeah, I got $1 million in the bank. You know, pay your taxes, pay your agent, pay all your trainers, this and that. You've got $1 million in the bank. I ain't mad at you for that. Who amongst us is like, you know, Catch, you're my boy.
If someone offered you $1 million today, I'd walk you to the train station at an airport.
I won't go to the train station unless it was required of the contract. But for $1 million, I'd ride a train. Across country.
I don't know why I just said I would walk you to the train station. I've never been to a train station before.
You never been on like an Amtrak or anything like that?
I mean, I've been on a subway.
But you never been like on Amtrak and just like going across country.
Oh no. I've been on a Greyhound, but I've never been on a train.
Greyhound, Steph. I've been on a train. I don't know if I've ever really done a Greyhound though.
Dude, my mom would put me on a bus alone at like the age of 10 and send my ass to Waco for a week. My grandmother would pick me up and then I'd get dropped back off at the bus station. Oh, I need to make you. Do you know how many stops a Greyhound bus makes between Round Rock and Austin? Like 17.
Wow.
There are so many. Now this is 30 years ago. So maybe.
But there's no cell phones. You just gotta hope that you get there.
I think back then I would have always gone to like a 7-Eleven and bought like an NFL magazine. Mm-hmm. And it's like getting on a plane, right? Like, you just need a magazine or a book. Oh, yeah. It's so long ago, I can't even remember what the hell I did. I probably had like an NFL digest. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. That's old school.
Let me ask you this.
And do that shit nowadays, by the way. That like they call CPS on you.
I know. Deservedly so. My mom should go to jail now for putting me on that Greyhound by myself. It's like when the kids are in the car, it's like, when is it a good age where you can leave your kids in the car? Because all I know is how I was dealt with. And I felt like I was left alone at the house at the age of 4 and put on Greyhounds at 5. I don't know. It was a different time in the 80s. The Longhorns are probably going to have like about 5 or 6 dudes drafted, right? I mean, Ossai goes in the second or third. Cosmi goes in the second or third. I think most people think those dudes are going to end up in the second. You've got Caden Sterns. You've got who's the list? So I think Taquan Graham's going to get drafted.
You could have Taquan Graham as a potential, Sam Ehlingher as a potential. The only guys that would be left are Chris Brown, Tariq Black, and Brennan Eagles.
Ehlinger, Cosmi, Ossai, Grams, and those 5 guys will be drafted. I think Chris Brown should be drafted, but it always feels like that dude's flying under the radar. So why would it be any different on draft night? Tariq Black ain't getting drafted, and I'm 30-70 on Brennan Eagles. So if the draft ends and the Longhorns, let's say, have 5 dudes drafted, that's a big number compared to recent years. So
That's,
what's the story?
well, you know what's interesting? I thought it was really interesting. We talked to Sarkisian on what's today, Wednesday as we record, so Tuesday, and it was asking him like, "Hey, do you really sell, the draft like to other guys?" And it was really interesting. It was a really transparent answer, Catch, because he said, I don't feel comfortable like trying to sell the Alabama stuff, and over there. He goes, but I also don't feel comfortable taking credit for what the previous staff here at Texas would have done. So basically, he's basically sells himself in relationships. And it's really interesting because you have coached, you and I have seen the past two coaches take credit for the programs that they came from and the guys they never coached. I mean, it was like the double dip.
I don't remember Herman taking credit for strong, like Deontay Foreman. There just weren't a lot of guys, but both of those coaches took a lot of credit for each of those other coaches' senior players to come, right? So
yes.
The guys that are going to be seniors on this roster, if Keandre Coburn goes pro, they'll be like, we developed Keandre Coburn into an NFL draft pick. So it's weird because we'll talk about Sark guys, and usually Sark guys are guys that he brings in the program, but the guys that become the first true Sark guys are always older players that get drafted. Not older players who don't get drafted, players who get drafted.
True. So, I mean,
and there probably will be some on this team.
Yeah. So essentially what you're asking what the storyline is, I guess at the end of the day, and maybe Texas fans may not want to hear this, you've almost got to give Tom Herman some credit for being able to put guys in the pros. That was something that didn't happen, with the high volume. And Catch, you have all the numbers, the high volume that Texas fans had grown accustomed to in the Mac Brown heydays. There was a fall off. You weren't getting offensive linemen drafted, right? And we talked about the first quarterback that's been drafted since 2010. We talked about 11 years. How many have been drafted, in the Big 12 since then? I mean, Oklahoma State has probably had more drafted in that time span than Texas. So, I guess what you said, again, I'm not going to do the half cake is half baked, but it's okay. Listen, just because a relationship doesn't work out doesn't mean you have to walk around saying that other person was a bad person. Sometimes it's just a bad fit. And at this point, it's okay to say, you know what, the relationship with Tom Herman didn't work out, but overall, he was good. He wasn't what you hired him to be and to win Big 12 championships, but they started putting guys in the pros, and that's what you kind of want. And, and you build off of that.
Well, last year wasn't a disaster. I mean, this program hasn't had enough recent success to say highest winning percentage in almost a decade and a top 20 finish is a disaster. Right. I mean, right. It wasn't what they wanted and it wasn't what they paid for, but it wasn't a disaster by recent history. And a team that finishes in the top 20 that, there won't, I think the thing would be there weren't any first round picks. So if Herman was still here, that would then be, the goalposts would move from when are you going to have some guys drafted to when are you going to have a first round pick? And then we'd start seeing the last time the Longhorns had that would suddenly be, I think, the stat that would take over. But I think having 5 guys drafted from a team that went 7-3 and, I think that's probably about right. So I think it's reflective, right? There's no great players, but 2 really good ones and then some sound NFL prospects. And that is, if Texas doesn't get any better, you'll probably see more of that. Guys, maybe a late, you know what I mean? Like this program really needs, in order to, I think, to start really taking a leap, they need some guys that when they come out are being talked about on ESPN. Yeah. And it's been a long time since Texas has had a guy that is being talked about on ESPN on the night of the draft. Whereas you're right. It was an annual event. I mean, I just, for a decade and a half, almost, it felt like even when Mac Brown teams didn't succeed, they had dudes going, multiple guys going in the first round every year. I mean, it was a yearly event, and you could, there were years where not only were Texas putting guys in the first round, but there was a long stretch there where it felt like every year Texas was putting a guy borderline either in the top 5 or borderline in the top 5. So just always part of the discussion. And I think it makes it really hard for Texas fans to appreciate a draft like this where, hey, there may be a half dozen guys that get drafted, and that's nothing to sneeze at, but it almost like it doesn't count if it's not a first rounder. Just like some people don't think 5 stars are hits unless they've been drafted in the, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, that guy is supposed to be great. And I think when we talk about the draft, it's kind of the same thing. Hey, Anwar, as we wrap things up,
yes,
the other guys, Cosmi, Sterns, Eagles, Brown, anything about any of those dudes you really want to hit on before we go?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think, Cosmi, we talked about Cosmi, Graham, again, upside is going to be someone that, he's a late round guy. So, I mean, he's like 6'7" kind of flyer, but he kind of reminds me a little bit of, who's the guy that went to the Saints, that eventually made the roster, for them. We're talking about defensive tackle to Chris.
Malcolm Roach?
Malcolm Roach. Why I was going to say Chris. But yeah, he reminds me maybe of the Malcolm Roach kind of profile, that you're like, you will have to see what you do when you get to a roster and see where you go from there. But I do have one question for you before we close.
Yeah.
Is there anybody on this current roster that you think we'll be talking about as a first day pick come next year?
No.
Okay.
No. Not that I can think of. I mean, quarterback's not really in a position to say that. Bijan's a year away. I think even if, Jordan Whittington would have to have it. Jordan Whittington's draft eligible. I mean, he's going into his 3rd year, but he'd have to have one hell of a year to start talking about him as a guy leaving early. There's nobody at the tight end position. There's nobody at the offensive line position. There's nobody at the defensive. I'm not ready to talk about Keandre. I think Keandre Coburn could be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Overshown is a draftable player, but I don't know what he is yet. And there's nobody. No. Deshaun Jameson at this point feels like definitely a drafted player, but I mean, I think that he has to prove what level he's going to be, and I'll be fully transparent. I don't even know. If Deshaun Jameson came out pro this year, he gets drafted.
Yeah.
But he's a 3rd day pick. So what do you, he is at this very moment, like give him a good senior season, but not a great senior season. What is Deshaun Jameson, like a 4th or 5th round pick?
Maybe. I mean, his special teams impact helps a little bit, but that's still in the 4th, 5th round category. You don't draft 3rd rounders to be special teams guys, but he's in that realm. It's like the Chris Boyd realm. I think he's better than Chris Boyd at this stage of his career, but it's that Chris Boyd. I mean, Mikael Thompson got drafted, right? So if you've got some talent, like you can get selected for sure, especially at the DB position. But yeah,
he's like a 4th or 5th round pick for me right now. And I think that he's a guy that can move up, but he'll be a guy that eventually has started like a couple of dozen games in his career. He'll have played a lot of football, and, it will come down to how he tests. And I don't know that I can say with certainty that I know, is he going to run such an eye-popping 40 that it shoots him? Because the cornerback position, the good news is there's like 15 guys who will go in the top 100 a lot of times, or, 10. The bad news is there's a lot of good athletes across the country that can pop 40 times and shuttle times that are really impressive. So it's a competitive group to be, it's like you're either elite of the elite or you're in this pack of guys. And right now, Deshaun Jameson would be a guy who would be in a pack of guys And it wouldn't shock me if he went like third round, but it wouldn't shock me if he went fifth round either at this point.
All right, last one. So since we don't have anybody that we're projecting now at first round, second day guys on this roster right now, again, this is sight unseen. So I know this will be held against you and I for Kingdom Come, but right now, could you say I see these are for sure some second day guys?
I don't think there's anybody on the offense. I'll at least say Jordan Whittington if he had a monster season, and he might. Maybe, but I don't think as of today there's anybody on the offense. On the defense, Coburn maybe. Just because defensive lineman, by the time he's done, he will have started a lot of football. I think he's a guy that will test well. I think he's a guy that will be a good character. I think Keandre Coburn for me is going to be a second day guy. And he wouldn't have been if he went in this draft. So I'm anticipating that with another year, he emerges into that kind of player. There's nobody else that I can say that about. DeMarvion Overshown's probably the Jordan Whittington of the defense. He could end up being like a second day guy, but he ain't that now. Because if he'd have been a second day guy now, he'd have been left. Yeah. So, and I got to be honest. I don't mean to do this. I'm worried a little bit about DeMarvion. I don't like the injury that he had. I don't like the timing of it. I don't like that. Right about the time he should be okay is also right about the time that football is starting. It's not my favorite thing in the world. So I don't know. Like he's going to coming off of a torn labrum, and I don't know. I don't know. You and I don't think have a lot of experience with that injury.
Yeah.
Impacting guys like him who have that injury and then go into a cash checking year. I mean, this is a huge year for DeMarvion, that he'll be coming off of a shoulder or a labrum injury. I don't know what that means and like what my expectations should be for that position. So we'll see, but I think he's a guy that could. No, man, the reality of this roster, and Texas fans don't want to hear it because they want to hear that Texas is ready to, they look at we went to 4 overtime. So we're right. No, you're not. You're not right there with Oklahoma. They're the 6-time defending champions. And they have a roster that we can look at and we can pick out a half dozen second or third day guys or second day guys, maybe first round guys. And this is a Texas roster that I thought the spring game screamed it. It does not have difference makers yet. That's the most damning thing about what Tom Herman left behind. It's a program void of definitive difference makers beyond Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, we've always talked about big plays, right? And the need to have the big plays. You had good guys, but like to your point, Oklahoma has the guys that catch it for 5 yards and take it to the house. They've got guys who have wiggle. They playmakers. At quarterback, at running back, at receiver, tight end, offensive line. Was it like last year? All their offensive linemen got drafted. I mean, they've got that machine going. And yes, it's not the popular conversation, but in order to, there is no coincidence that there's a reason why they're a 6-time champion either, right? I mean,
well, and even in their transfer business, they took a starting left tackle away from Tennessee, and they took one of the SEC's best running backs.
Yeah.
Right. Texas is taking backups off of those types of teams that have been not very productive among the, I mean, it's a slight difference of sorts, but like they've added true impact. They've added a left tackle and a potential running back starter at a minimum in the portal. And Texas has not been able to tap into the portal to get that level of prospect yet. And, I mean, at this point, this Texas team, it would be an amazing coaching job at this point if Texas were to win the Big 12 championship this year, because on paper, it doesn't, like on paper a year ago, this team had more talent on paper. You know, you had Ossai and you had Cosmi and you had Ehlinger and you had Caden Sterns, and those guys didn't all have the big years that everybody thought they were, which would have elevated potentially their draft stock. I mean, Ossai, you can make a case that Joseph Ossai was a disappointment a year ago, because if you take that Oklahoma State game out of the equation, his stats weren't super impressive at all. I mean, he had a National Player of the Week game against Oklahoma State. I mean, we'll remember that performance forever. It's one of the great defensive performances that I've ever seen, but he virtually had 0 other sacks the rest of the season. Almost all of them came in that Oklahoma State game, and he plays with a lot of heart and a lot of passion. It's interesting to see NFL people look at him and say he's a bit of a one-trick pony as a pass rusher, that he has essentially one move. And there's part of me that thinks, well, he has one move because he was only at that position for a year. I mean,
yeah,
you know, to me, that's a positive almost as much as it is a negative, because I think Ossai is a guy that with better coaching, there's a lot more to extrapolate out of him. But he did not have a great season. He was the best player that Texas had on defense, but he did not show up every week and deliver the goods. And Texas doesn't have anybody like that, really. I mean, even to put Bijan into that category right now is a leap of faith, because as we discussed in the last week, he's still largely unproven. I mean, he's got a couple of 100-yard games, and we're now projecting that moving forward, A, because of his talent, and B, because of kind of how it happened at the end of the season. But, you know, this time next year, we'll be talking about Bijan Robinson potentially coming off of an All-American season, coming off of at least we're talking about like what tier of yardage we think he's going to get. This time next year, he'll be coming off of whatever that answer is. And when we talk about, do you think Texas has first day, second day picks on this team, we're going to be like, yeah, no, that's one right there. And we'll be able to, I think, count more. I think that's the upside of what Sarkisian will bring to the table. But as it currently stands, this is a program void of difference-making talent, and it shows up in the NFL draft.
Cool. I can't even add to that.
I didn't mean for that to sound like a closing statement, but in the end, it felt like I gave a presidential address, and that was my final remark. So on that note, look, for myself and Anwar Richardson, thank you for watching the video. If you liked it, subscribe, like we'll be doing more. And if you liked it, you could also like it. Like there's 2 things that you could do. If you do either, we thank you. Actually, we double thank you. So until next time, you guys take care of yourselves. Later.